Welcome to Dr. Teach Me to Parent. Glad to have with us again this week. We have a very special program for you. Doug Bond is with us as our guest today, and we're going to introduce him in a moment. But he comes from a background of writing as an author and as a historian and as a tour guide for people who travel in various parts of the world. So we're going to take a look at his history and his knowledge and his experience in the area of writing books and learning about history and obviously traveling to points beyond to actually experience history once again. But the issue that I've asked him to speak about today is, how do families become enriched? How do families grow? How do families improve, better themselves through travel? And through travel, particularly in historical parts of the world. So we'll take a look at that as we communicate a little bit today again, Doug. But let me ask you about you and your family. Did you grow up in a family that traveled? Did you grow up in a family that were authors, were writers, were historians? Or is this something that you developed on your own after you kind of matured and became independent?
It's a good question, Allan. I really didn't grow up in a family that traveled internationally, but we did buy books. I grew up in a very literary home.
So home was a reading home.
Absolutely. I remember snuggling up on the couch next to my mother when I was a little boy, and she would read Shakespeare out loud to me.
Oh.
And she would read Chaucer in Middle English out loud to me.
Really?
Didn't understand a word of it.
No, you wouldn't understand.
But I loved the cadence and the rhythm of that. I loved her voice. I loved being there near her.
It was a memory.
Yeah.
When she was creating a memory, she maybe didn't teach you, a fact.
Right.
But the idea of that was a memory that you live on.
Absolutely. And then she would find that there was at the local university there was going to be a Shakespeare play, or there was going to be some other drama. She'd take us to dramas,
really?
And take us to plays and all. So we really kind of got this sort of sense of the world is big and the world is larger by literature. And literature that's purely modern, it sort of makes us irrelevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't connect us to places and people and events and ideas from the past. And so my folks did that by reading.
The power of a mother.
Yeah.
The power of reading, the power of family life.
That's right.
It included books and articles and magazines, I assume, and all different kinds of writing.
Yeah.
It just introduced you into the world of history.
Yep. And I grew up in the Pacific Northwest where it rains a lot, so every summer vacation we'd get rained in, it seemed like, and my mom would bring a pile of books and she would read out loud. I remember hearing the rain outside and reading away at Treasure Island or Kidnapped or whatever, and it was always read aloud. So that we passed that on to our family. So I still read aloud.
It is something that's generational.
Yeah.
This is an area of life. If parents are readers, kids are readers, and they pass it on to their children.
Right.
And if they don't, they obviously miss a lot.
That's right. A shared experience of reading a book. There's something lost when we just watch a show or watch a movie together. Those have their own legitimacy to a certain extent. But when you share a book and you hear the book, that goes more deeply down, I think, into your psyche as an individual. And
so books and Bond go together.
They go together.
I guess that's what you're really saying.
That's certainly true. I grew up loving books and appreciating them, and having that appreciation held up for me by my mother, my father as well. Of course, he was more of a mathematician, physicist type guy, but he was in on all of that, and it went deeply into my.
So how did you get interested in history? Reading about history, writing about history now as an author. You got a father who's in math, and you think, okay, you could have gone engineering, or science, but you went history. What tipped the scale in that direction? Do you know?
That's a good question. I suppose part of it is that I didn't get the math gene from my father. I feel like I'm in good company. C.S. Lewis failed the Oxford entrance math part of the examination a couple times. So he was abysmal in math. In World War I, he had to be in the infantry because he couldn't do the trigonometry for the artillery, But I think for me, when I was growing up and my friends wanted to play rockets or spaceships, stuff like that, I didn't even get that. I wanted to play knights. I wanted to play cowboys. I wanted to play, something from the past. And I don't know why for sure, but I always
dipped into history.
History
Dipped
was
into
always there.
history.
Yep, I wanted to read about it. When there was a book, a sci-fi book or something like that, and I'm not in any way discrediting science
Sure.
fiction. Ray Bradbury, I'm reading his Dandelion Wine right now, but it just wasn't. It didn't resonate with me. In fact, I have to admit, the first time I opened the Chronicles of Narnia, it was fantasy, and it didn't connect to my love of history. Now, I've subsequently become a great appreciator of C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia, but initially not, because I wanted to read about history, and I would sit down and I would just read about things from the past, and I could sit down and read about the 100 Years' War or something because I was fascinated by it. Just something about it intrigued me.
So it wasn't just church history, religious history, or any particular area of history. You just got interested in history to start with.
Initially, it was just all history, and then I think in college I was sort of inspired by a professor that was he inspired me about the whole period of the Renaissance and Reformation.
Oh, yes.
So that particular period, then I began to read more of the sort of the main players in that. That's when I first read the Agony and the Ecstasy about Michelangelo and all, but then I began to read other theologians and all from the Reformation when I was in my upper teens and early 20s.
So we're talking about what years in history that you kind of focused your attention in your reading?
Yeah, that was, I would say, a medieval to 16th, 17th century. That was initially where I would, and I suppose it's not surprising that a number of my books are in that particular period to today. Yeah, that was that intrigued me and fascinated me. I've only more recently, in the last 3 years or so, started writing about the 20th century. World War I, World War II. I have historical fiction novels set in those periods. But
you must be a believer in in kids learning history. I mean, you must really sell history.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you were a teacher. You taught children, kids, high school, I guess, junior high, and so on. And you must really be a believer that we should read history. We should know history. We should learn history.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you why. Yeah. But before you answer the why should we learn history? Let me ask you a question. How do you get kids to even open a history book?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you get them to even think of history or entertain the idea of reading the history or learning history? Yeah. Right. It's that.
Well, I think it's super important questions because if you hand a typical history textbook to a 13-year-old and say, okay, we're going to do history here, that's going to be the sure way to make them turn and run the other way. Well, the sort of the postmodern teenager, if we can use that terminology, the postmodern teenager is about immediate gratification, which precludes history. That means we don't care about history. We don't even know if there is a history.
They don't want to care.
Doesn't matter. All that matters is the here and now. And that tends to be that's real for all of us. I'm not throwing young people under the bus or millennials under the bus necessarily. I think there's a measure of that in all of us. C.S. Lewis called it our chronological snobbery. We prefer to think that where we are right now is the epitome of everything. That nothing has been as good as it is right now, and that everything exists for right now. And one of the most important reasons why young people, and adults for that matter, need to read history is that it disabuses us of the notion that we've arrived, that where we are right now is the ultimate. When you begin to read Blaise Pascal, the mathematician from the 17th century, contemporary of John Bunyan, you begin reading him and you realize, you start to feel really, really small. About barometric pressure, the studies that he was doing in Paris and all of that. You begin to realize that there were minds considering questions and ideas that we don't even have categories for anymore for the average person.
And to get a kid excited about that. To get some junior high kid, high school kid, kind of excited the fact that there was a lot going on in this world. Hundreds of years. We don't think that way. We think, as you say, the here and now. And your mother did it. She pulled out some old books from years and years back. And just read them to you, and somehow or other that just helped you connect. And then from there you take it, of course.
Right. My mother largely read classics to us. Books that had big words in them. We didn't necessarily understand what was going on when she's reading Middle English. One not operable with his shores to the droga de marchet pierce into the root. I didn't understand a word she was saying. But it inspired me. I wanted to know, okay, who talked that way? When did they talk that way? what was going on? What was going on in the development of the English language then and all? It's fascinating. But you ask the question, how do we get them to do it? That question began to simmer in my mind about 20 years ago.
Oh, yes.
And I began to realize that, one of the things that kids do like in every generation is great stories.
Yes.
They like rip-snorting stories.
Yep.
They like yarns that they don't want to put down. So I began to invest in Ever-Ready Battery. I wanted to write books where kids would, good night, Mom, good night, Dad, get tucked in. Yeah. And then they'd pull out the flashlight. Of course, now it'd be your phone. They'd pull out their flashlight and they would read under the covers, like I used to do.
Sure.
My mom and dad knew it, I think.
And
they didn't really mind it. They were pretty happy. And my kids did the same, and I knew it, and, we're okay with that. Unless they're just exhausted the next day and they're worth nothing. But I began to think, okay, I want to craft really fascinating stories, intriguing stories that will so set the hook in these kids' minds. So one of my series, the Crown and Covenant trilogy, my signature first novel was Duncan's War. In that series, is set in 17th century Scotland. I'd been reading about 17th century Scotland, and the history that I was reading about was pretty turgid. I mean, I like reading history, and even turgid history. I like the facts, I like the details, I like the causes, the effects, the analysis, and all of that. But I realized this is not accessible to anybody but a history geek like me.
That's right.
So I thought, how can I make this really fascinating history accessible to a young adult audience? So my first 7 books were all YA, young adult category for the publishers.
You almost wonder if some of that's kind of built in. I have a patient that is a history buff. He reads in the World Wars, 1 and 2. Parents are not interested.
Yeah.
Parents don't support that, don't particularly encourage it, because that's not their interest.
Right.
But he's a buff. He reads everything, and he's knowledgeable, and he talks to people about it. And I think that's kind of the thing about reading, is when you can read something and then talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Now, who do you talk to? If your parents are not interested in the dialogue, I mean, grandparents, relatives of some kind, neighbors, friends, teachers, there's got to be somebody that interacts with you about history.
Right, that's right.
If you're going to read history.
That's right. No.
But if no one interacts with you, it just falls into the dead heap.
No, that's right. I tend to be a verbal processor, and not everybody is a verbal processor, but I certainly am. And so I find myself, I like to. When I talk through something, then I begin to get the sequence. Yeah. So sometimes I talk to myself. I have to be careful where I write. If I write in a library somewhere, they'll bring the white coats and drag me away. But and my wife will sometimes say, I'm not quite as into all things 1855 and 56 as you are, because I have to talk about it.
I think most people get ideas from interaction.
Right. Yeah.
They might read something, and that's an interaction, but they like to talk to somebody. And then from that talking and discussion, you get an idea.
Right. Yeah.
Then you go and develop that idea a little bit.
Yeah.
But it starts, I think, in that interactional pattern when you have somebody that shares an idea or shares an interest or shares a topic with you.
Yeah.
And has time to devote to you.
And really, that's how friendships are forged.
They are.
I just finished reading C.S. Lewis's Four Loves, and his category on friendship, phileo, he takes the 4 Greek words for love. We only have one in English, but the Greeks had 4, and Lewis unpacks those as only C.S. Lewis can do. But he really gets excited about friendship because friendship meant so much to him, and so much of his writing came from, I suppose we could say, iron sharpening iron, but talking with Tolkien and talking with Hugo Dyson and Charles Williams and these others, his own brother Warney.
That's an essential relationship to have.
Absolutely.
Is someone with whom you can speak and talk.
Yep.
But somebody who shares that kind of level of talking, that interest of history, and will listen, and will interact, and will ask questions, and will dialogue with you, and from that you generate more ideas.
That's true.
Then you can go off into your little room and write.
Right, exactly.
Because you've had this interactional pattern. But we've got to have that kind of person in our life.
Right.
Often it's our spouse, but not always.
No.
Sometimes it's our children, but not always. Sometimes it's our neighbor. I mean, could be anybody. But you got to have that person with whom you dialogue and get ideas, and that shares something in common, history as an example, and from there it develops.
And the danger, I think, in our sort of our introspective world, or where we get ingrown and we're so focused on our device.
Sure.
There's a tendency for us to skip the relational, human relational interaction. So we have times in our home where it's all devices; they go away.
They go away.
It's going to be people. It's going to be human beings.
And start talking about ideas. Start talking about experiences. Talking about feelings that you have, experiences and events that have taken place in your life. Good stuff generates from that.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to take a break. Go get a cup of coffee and come on back in about a minute or two, and we're going to pick up with Doug Bond, author and tour guide, and we're going to ask him the question: why do kids need to learn history? Why is that important in the development of young people? And what does it add to their life? So join us in a few minutes, okay?
Pompe disease is a progressive, multisystemic, debilitation, and often fatal muscular disease. The United Pompe Foundation was formed to assist those affected by Pompe with the medical costs and other expenses that they may not be able to fully cover through their insurance. Visit UnitedPompe.com to learn more and to make a tax-deductible contribution to the United Pompe Foundation.
When I set foot on the campus to come visit it, I was struck by how open and how welcoming the students and the professors were. Coming to Gordon was like coming home.
I think intentional community is what Jesus modeled with his disciples, and Gordon has really fostered a good place for intentional community to happen.
Gordon is a place where you can meet people from all over the world and hear their stories. I meet a lot of different people who are shaping who I am today.
Gordon seeks to graduate men and women of character and of leadership, and the world is the place where Gordon students belong.
Choosing to go to Gordon was, I think, one of the best decisions I've made in my life. I expect to be changed.
Okay, welcome back. I'm glad you're joining us as we talk today on the program of Dr. Teach Me to Parent with Doug Bond, who is a travel guide, if you will, and an author. And we're talking about why kids need to learn history. What's good about the history lessons of the day for the development of their junior high kid, your high school kid, and maybe your elementary kid, as well. But let me give you a quote that just kind of puts this segment into perspective, and just kind of read it there on the screen. Life takes on new interest when we serve others and when we travel with others. And Doug, that's really the critical thing. Families that travel together learn together. Families that travel learn history. Why is it important? Why is history important for us as parents to teach our kids?
Yeah. Well, the age-old axiom of those who will not learn from history are bound to repeat it.
Well, we're going to learn. We better learn it.
And I think as in parenting, if our children don't learn from history, if we as parents don't teach them the importance of our past,
yes,
how did we get here? Even your own family past,
yes,
your family heritage. How did we get here?
We've made that a very important part of our family history. Mm-hmm. Part of teaching of our kids. They all know how our family came to be.
Yeah.
And we celebrate that.
Yeah.
It's an important part of our life as a family.
Yeah, it is. And if we don't teach our children history, they will repeat it. And I don't think we should be surprised. I think we forfeit surprise, the right to be surprised, if they end up repeating the worst atrocities of history. I mean, it is one of the great cautionary things to study history. How did that come about? The 20th century, it was the bloodiest century in the history of the world. The secular 20th century was. How did that happen? We need to know that. Our kids need to know that. I read an article the other day in mainstream media reporting on a recent study that indicated that 2/3 of millennials polled didn't know what Auschwitz was.
Really?
They didn't know what Auschwitz was.
2/3 of people who are in, let's say, their 20s and 30s.
Yeah. They did not know what Auschwitz was. Yeah, they didn't know if it was German cuisine. They didn't know if it was a place. They did not know.
Didn't know where it was.
They didn't know what happened there. They didn't know what happened there. They didn't connect it to Nazi Germany, to National Socialist Party in Germany, Hitler. They didn't connect it to World War II. They did not know what Auschwitz was. That is a big problem. And if that's true, that those who will not learn from history are bound to repeat it, that's a frightening thought.
Yeah.
That there's a whole group, a whole segment of our society right now, many of them are very actively involved in sort of the new social order of things that don't know our history.
Yeah.
They can't even tell us something. And this isn't like, we're not talking like medieval history. We're talking about something that happened less than a century ago. We're 75 years. We're talking about World War II, 20th century. Mid-20th century, and they did not know.
Is that a failure of the schools, or is it a failure of our homes?
I think it's both. I think it's both, but again, we've sort of, homes very often have relegated education to schools, but we've actually removed historical study from our curriculum. We study social studies. We don't really systematically study history. And I think that's a huge problem, because and so often we take and revise the study of history. We don't really like certain things about the past, and so we sort of change it. Well, that's not the way studying history works. We actually need to study it with all the warts. We need to see that those heroes, yes, they did good things, but they also had feet of clay. That's important to know, so that we can learn to discern, we can learn to be generous where we need to be generous. We can see ourselves in that too, because let's face it, that's the way it all is.
We have this belief, and I think there's some truth to it, by the way, that history teachers are your worst teachers. I can remember going to history class, and I have no interest in that. But yet today, I remember I can see pages in the history book, in the textbook that I had in high school.
Right.
I can see pictures on there of some historical event still in my mind today. But yet you think of teachers as being the worst teachers. How do we get over that? How do kids enjoy history, learn history, want to learn history, if their history teacher is considered to be the worst teacher on the lot?
Right. Yeah. Well, I remember.
What do we do?
I remember as a ninth grader having in a literature class, and literature and history are very connected, but studying Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. And honestly, as I look back on my formal education, this was probably the worst teacher that I had. I mean, he looked like he would rather be doing anything but teaching ninth graders. And I remember reading that book, and that book took hold of me. Magwitch, Pip, and all of the themes that were going on about that. How this boy scorned the one who loved him, Joe, and who really cared for him and all that, and he was embarrassed about Joe, and all these themes just really went deep in my psyche as a young man. But it was in spite of the teaching. The book itself did the deed. And I think that when we do have teachers that teach history that really would rather be doing something else, I would suggest they do something else then, because history is actually fascinating. You have to make it boring. History is intensely.
But I do think
intriguing.
that kids get excited about history in spite of the teacher they have.
That can be true.
I mean, a book can excite them. A topic can excite them. Just putting it into proper perspective can excite. Kids can get excited about history. Even though the teacher may not be a very good teacher. So overlook that. Get beyond that. Get through it. Get past it. Get beyond the year. Go to the next year.
Yeah, yeah.
And just remember, history is not that teacher.
Yeah, yeah.
History is something else.
And that's why I think, and again, this is sort of a lot of the core of my mission as an author. I write primarily historical fiction. Probably 2/3 of my books are historical fiction, and my theory behind that is if you can transport the reader boots on the ground to 17th century Scotland or to the trenches of World War I in C.S. Lewis's regiment and platoon. If you can actually transport them, and that requires a lot of careful research, but if that becomes woven into the part of the story and they're there, they feel it, they smell it, they hear it. They feel the threat of the bombardment. The trench whistle blows. They've got to go over the top. If you can transport them into that, they will know World War I history. They will know 17th century Scottish history. They will know colonial American history. King George's War, my book Guns of Thunder, or Guns of Providence, set in the American Revolution. They will enter into that, and what will that do? It will make them want to read more. They want to find out more about that. Maybe they want to test me and see, well, did he get it accurate? Go ahead. I don't care why they read. Just go for it. I want to get them so excited about that period of time. And you have to have a personality. You have to have a character that they attach to, that's real, that's authentic to the time, and they begin to know that character. And they
but you said something that was very interesting. We as parents today kind of just turn it over to the school. Turn it over to the teacher. And if the teacher does a good job, we're happy.
Right.
Teacher doesn't, we're not very happy. But as parents, we have a responsibility on that. And it seems to me, you don't have to be a historian, as a parent. But you have to have an appreciation that there is something in history that your kid might really benefit from and enjoy and maybe grow from, and maybe make it a love, make it an area of love, of study. I mean, who knows what's inside your kid. So a parent, I think, needs to expose a kid to history in the same way that a parent needs to expose a kid to the different sports, that are available at schools today, and the different social issues that are involved, and the options of lifestyle that are out there. History is part of a parent responsibility. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I think that there is in the home, and I go back to my own experience, the experience I've tried to replicate in our family. I have 6 children, 4 married and adults, having grandchildren for us, and 2 still at home, 13 and 16. And, reading aloud. Virtually a day does not go by in our home where we don't read aloud. Now, it's often the Bible, but it's we've read over and over. Lots of my books got read in manuscript, sort of test-driven on my own children at various stages along the way in my writing. Sitting down, clearing the decks, fire in the fireplace, sitting down there and reading together, the voice of the parent, reading that text.
That says a lot, doesn't it?
Oh, it's huge.
It really conveys that you as a parent give value, in this case, to history. And you want your kid to give value,
that's right,
to it and learn from it.
A child that's not seeing that replicated in their home is going to probably be looking for other thrills elsewhere, and also there is this sort of this break in relationship. The thing about oral reading together as a family, is it does build a common shared experience. And you begin to remember, and you even have little things that you say. You have family, family insider jokes, that are based on that story you share, you experience, and you experience it at a particular time. It was raining, it was sunny, you were at the beach or whatever. You have this shared experience, and we're almost entirely losing that.
I think of Martin Luther King. That's how he grew up. This was a reading family. This was a discussing family. This was a talking family. This was a history family. This was a socially conscious family. You think of Jonathan Edwards. He preached his sermon every Sunday to his family first. Right. Spurgeon preached his sermon to his family first. And it became part of family life. And then it was shared with their congregations. I mean, this is part of history, how great men put value on family and wanted to educate the family and did so. They got it first.
That's right. And I think one of the things, it's another dimension of this. It's maybe a little bit of a rabbit trail or an excursus, I prefer to call them, but family meals. fewer and we have fast food, we have all kinds of
Yep,
other things,
yep.
and we have fewer and fewer family meals together.
Keep going. I like that.
And in not that long ago,
Yeah.
families sat down together 3 times a day.
Yes.
And then at least 2 times a day. Mm-hmm. And now, how many times a week?
Once a week.
Does the family actually sit down together and sit at the table all at the same time, no devices, share a meal together, pass me the potatoes. Oh, would you like some more meat? Whatever. And talk and look at each other and interact. That is, as prosaic as that may sound, or would have sounded in other generations,
yes,
that is almost lost in our society, and that's a great loss to young people.
Yes, it is. I see a lot of families don't eat at all, ever, together.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be weeks and months go by.
Yeah.
Everybody's off in their own little world.
Yep.
How do you share life when you're not talking to each other, not being in the same room with each other?
Right.
How do you get a kid excited about something that you're excited about when you don't even talk to that kid and be available to share that level of excitement?
Oh, that's right.
Could be history, but it could be another topic as well. It doesn't have to be history.
Yeah. Maybe we can blame the inventors of the microwave. You could have all this hot and ready. All you had to do is a kid just browse in the refrigerator, pull it out, stick it in the microwave. And they didn't need to sit down together. Of course, the nutritional value of a lot of that food that you throw in a microwave isn't very good for them anyway.
Hey, let's take a break. Get a cup of coffee. We're going to come back in about a minute and a half. I'm going to ask you a question, Doug, when we come back, and that is, what is the value of travel together as a family? I mean, we have families that travel during the year. They take time off school, a lot of homeschoolers, a lot of charter schools, where there's a flexibility of school scheduling now, and families can travel at different times than just the summer. Right. Is there value in traveling? Let's talk about that, okay?
Absolutely.
Come on back in about a minute.
The Green Gables Care Home is a 24-hour assisted living facility for the elderly located in Clovis, California, offering spacious private and semi-private rooms which are wheelchair approved, catering to the special person in your life who needs attention and wants to live in a loving home environment. The Green Gables Care Home has assisted living in secured homes for elderly with Alzheimer's, memory loss, and for your loved ones needing assistance with their activities of daily living. Call 559-297-9438 and visit greengablescarehome.com.
Sometimes good intentions hurt rather than help. For just $1.76 per meal, the Fresno Rescue Mission offers more than food. We offer hope. Please donate today.
Do you need a locksmith? Layman's Lock and Safe Service and Repair is available for you. 559-228-1805.
Gained a lot, learned a lot, and got a lot of love. If it weren't for the knowledge that I had gained from the classes at PCC, I probably wouldn't be the mom I am today. See, there it goes.
I would love you to meet my son, Aaron. My situation was very difficult. I didn't know how my life was going to turn out.
We graduated in June 2010, and we got married in July. And through family, the Pregnancy Care Center changed our lives.
The Pregnancy Care Center was a huge, vital part in helping me walk through that pregnancy, in educating me and loving on me during that time.
Choosing a Medicare plan can be difficult and frustrating. Susan Hatch can guide you through the Medicare maze and help find the right plan for you. Susan helps people understand the confusing and drastic changes that occur every year in Medicare. Susan will only recommend plans that will protect your assets and allow you to continue to see your personal doctor.
As a 100% independent agent, Susan is not controlled by any particular insurance company to steer a person onto any one particular plan. Susan was awarded the #1 Medicare supplement agent in California. Look for Susan's Medicare question and answers every Monday in the Fresno Bee. Call Susan at 559-307-2287 and visit MedicareToday.net.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Okay, welcome back from your break and joining us in our discussion on teaching kids history and the importance of history in the life of a young junior high student, high school student, elementary student, and learning it through books, discussion, dialogue, learning it through travel, a whole variety of ways. But history is an important thing for a kid to learn.
That's right.
Now, a question. Doug Bonds, who is a historian, and who is an author, and who is a tour guide. Why should kids travel?
So such an important question. I think it's much the same reason why they should sit down at dinner together, why they should sit down and read a book together as a family. Because it's a shared experience. Mom and Dad aren't going to work. We're here to spend time together. That's the whole intentionality of that. And whether that's in your local community, putting things aside and go. Oftentimes we neglect our local history.
Sure.
I had done it for years, and then in 2016, my book's Battle of Seattle, set in the Puget Sound Indian Wars, 1855 and 56. I was having a ball. We would go as a family, and we would hike these trails. We'd go to where that particular longhouse was, or where that particular battle was. There's a monument there next to a dollar tree where Chief Leshai was hanged, and we'd been driving past these things, but we hadn't put the pieces together. So we're doing this and experiencing this together as a family, and there's an intentionality about that, and you begin to think, wait a minute, there were a lot of things going on in this particular piece of real estate than what's going on right now. There were people with lives and hopes and dreams and ambitions and fears, and
great people came from this town, or great events happened in this particular town that you would never know about it otherwise.
Right, and then that little history museum there in DuPont or something, that you'd never been to before. You just drive by it. Suddenly, as you've done just a little bit of reading and research about this, and you've talked about it as a family over dinner together, and then you go to that. Wow, you suddenly have all kinds of treasures to discover. You say, wait a second, this is the kind of tomahawk they used, or this is the kind of, and these artifacts that are there, they mean something now. You have a context for them. You got a file folder that you can put those things into, and the story can build.
Yes, you do. You create those, yes.
Yeah, and so when a family does that together, they now have a new history that they've just shared together, that's shaped them and that's given them a vantage point.
And give them something to talk about for the rest of their life as a family.
That's right.
Memories that they'll always share with not only each other, but then with their kids who have kids and down the line.
Yeah. And they will now begin to look at the moment we live in. They'll feel a little bit smaller. And actually feeling smaller is a good thing for us. We don't tend to think that way, but it is. Right. And one of the things take, for example, European travel. The first time I walked into Westminster Abbey in London was in 1982. I was out of college. I was doing the obligatory 1980s see the world, thing. Don't cut your hair or shave or anything, but go see the world. So I was doing that, and little did I know, I was actually taking myself on my first church history tour. I kind of knew I was because of my reading. I wanted to go to these places. I wanted to see where this happened. I wanted to experience exactly.
That was the spark.
Yeah, and. So I remember going into that place, and I'll never forget it, and I experience it on another level over and over again every time I go into a Gothic cathedral. You go in, and you suddenly feel very insignificant. And we live in a world that tells young people that they're immensely significant before they've done anything or accomplished anything.
Yeah.
And that's really not fair to
When I
those
walk
kids.
into one of these Gothic churches, cathedrals, they're huge. You do feel so small.
Oh, yeah.
But it makes you think all the history that took place there before you walked in the front door.
That's right.
1,000 years
Yeah.
of history, of interactions, of people and events and struggles and battles and fights and family
Yeah.
feuds and whatever else took place.
Yeah.
But it took place in that cathedral, and there there you stand.
Yeah, you're in Canterbury Cathedral, and there's Thomas of Becket, and it's 1170, December 29th.
Yeah.
And you've got 5 knights coming in who've basically been commissioned to be assassins of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they go right into the nave of of Canterbury Cathedral, and they bump off Thomas of Becket. And I think this is, a young person that goes in there. I think of young people that go on my trips. 14-year-old we were talking about earlier that was on the Armistice Tour in France last year for the 2018 for the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Armistice ending World War I. We also did Normandy and went to World War II sites as well. And this young man came and he was kind of thinking it was going to be kind of boring. And he was so fascinated. He was so intrigued by what he saw.
Yeah.
I remember seeing him go into the cathedral. I love looking around at these young people who've never been inside a Gothic cathedral. They go inside a French cathedral, go inside Notre Dame or something. And their head, inevitably everybody looks up. You have to look up.
Yeah.
And you begin to think, how many centuries was this
That's
did
right.
it take to build this, and how many hundreds, maybe thousands of people, certainly thousands of people, over how many generations building this and carving out of stone these images and these columns and these vaulted. See, how do they keep those? How many tens of thousands of tons of stone up there above my head? All of these things, you suddenly begin to get all kinds of perspective that the modern world doesn't give you. You are the center of your world in the moment we live in. Self-referentialism is one of the greatest problems, I think, for young people in the home, in the school, in society. They think that the world exists for them. They have this, it's like the geocentric theory of the earth. Well, that's the young person today, and all of us to a certain extent, certainly. But it's a sign of maturing when we begin to see, I'm not the center. My assumptions, my ideas are very nascent right now. I really haven't come to a place where I understand very much. Travel puts you in a position where you're more accurately viewing yourself. You see that you really haven't accomplished anything yet, that you really don't know very much. And rather than that pounding you down and discouraging you, it actually gives you a realistic place where you are so that you can get to places where you want to go.
Is that right? The old question, who am I?
Yeah.
And who are you? And how do I fit into this world in which I live? Why was I born? What is my purpose? How do I fit into this scheme of things that takes place, not in Fresno or the town in which I live, but the whole world?
Yeah,
exactly. And as a psychologist, I look at that question about traveling, kids traveling, from the point of view of learning independence. You get lost.
Yeah.
You got to find your way,
Gotta
right?
keep track of your passport.
That's right. I mean, that independent kind of a thing. And you learn education, not just history, but all kinds of educational things. How to find your way, and how do you get directions, and how do you talk to people, how do you meet new people? People are different from you. People are strange.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
The math on the exchange rate. You have to do the
the
mental
problem solving
math.
and the math.
Exactly.
I mean, there's just huge learning that takes place, amounts of learning that takes place when you travel like that. It's not just learning history. It's learning yourself, and it's learning how to navigate this world.
Exactly. No, I think it's very important, and obviously not everyone can do international travel.
No.
With we have a number of families that go on our church history tours. History where it happened is sort of our little call phrase for what we do, and we do our very best to make it possible for families with children to go on trips. Families
You
with
like
teens.
children and families going on a tour with you?
Absolutely.
I mean, you're a tour guide. You go to Germany, and you go to France, and
Absolutely.
you go to Switzerland, and you go to England, and you go to a lot of different places.
Right. And one of the reasons I do is because it puts I'm looking out there at the faces, 40, 50 people that are on a coach tour with us. And when I see young people, it reminds me, make sure that I tell stories. make sure that I approach telling them what happened here and to whom it happened in a story, because children love stories.
That's
the
right.
fact is, you and I love stories
That's
too.
right. Yeah, we know.
But it
Yeah.
reminds me to do that, and that's better for everybody. And those young people will not forget that. They've stood there. What was said here? Who was burned here?
Yes.
Why were they burned here? What did they believe so strongly that they would go to the stake and be burned there in Oxford?
You direct a tour, and as you say, 30, 40, 50 people go on your tour. What about the kid who graduates from high school or graduates from college and says, I'm going off on my own? I think you experienced that yourself. I'm going to just go and pack up my bag and I'll start out and I'll come back sometime.
Yeah.
And on their own. Is that a good thing or not a good thing?
Well, I think I would say in my case, mine was pretty intentional. I had been reading. The reason I wanted to go is because I'd been reading these people. I'd read Calvin's Institutes. I was reading.
So you had a
these
kind of
various
more
things.
of a purpose.
And I thought, I want to go to the places where all this happened. I want to go see those places. I want to experience it. I want to sit there in Lausanne Cathedral and think about the Lausanne debate in 1536, in October of 1536, where there were 135 apologists for the medieval understanding of how you are right with God, which was by a whole lot of work and effort on your part.
Sure.
And there were three guys sitting across the way who had to stand up against 135 of these apologists over here, trained theologians who were going to try to prove these three guys wrong.
Like a court
exactly.
debate, if you will. Yeah.
And I remember I had read about that, and I knew the story of that, and sitting in there and thinking about those three men, and one of them was in his 20s. John Calvin was only in his 20s then, and Pierre Viret and William Farel. That's just three guys, and at the end of the day, at the end of the week of debate, you have a whole bunch of the 135 guys defrocking themselves, admitting their error, and siding with the other three guys.
With the other three that won.
And it was remarkable, the story. I mean, here's a guy who's been equipped with a photographic memory. John Calvin, in his 20s, and when they said, you don't even know the early church fathers, Calvin stands up and he freely recites from the early church fathers for the next 2.5 hours without looking at a book, and on topic. And he's got this search engine, and they
He was in his own computer, wasn't he?
Exactly.
Wow.
And so when you hear that story and you're there and you see it happening there, and I read little excerpts from it and all that,
you'll always remember that.
You'll never forget.
You'll always remember
Absolutely.
that, and that will impact you as a kid.
Yeah.
If you're where this kind of great debate took place, that, you'll always remember that, and you'll come back to that in your thinking.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's absolutely right.
Wait, now you direct tours. Is that what you try to do in your tours? Is to kind of bring people to these places of excellence, these places of decision making, these places of history change?
Yeah.
Is that what you?
No, I think so. I think that there are. I think that we are changed by story. I mean, really, the Bible is. It's not just a whole bunch of laws, cobbled together.
Sure.
It is a story.
Sure.
It starts out in the beginning. And what does it do? And then you go to the end of Revelation, and the story is ending, and it tells us that there's a final ending to the story. It's a story, and. I think that when we get to a place where these things have happened, we are not going to be the same. We can't
We're
be the
different.
same. We're going to be changed by it, and in good ways. You take the arts. Architecture. We've talked about architecture.
Yes,
you
yes.
take, great paintings. You go to where Savonarola, was burned in Florence.
Yeah.
On our Rome to Geneva trip, we go there, and you go to the San Marco Abbey where he presided, and you go in there, and suddenly you realize these monks, the graffiti they were doing on the walls
Sure.
was fine Renaissance art. These were very highly trained men, and they were taking scenes from the Gospels, from the history of redemption in the Bible, and they were depicting it in magisterial paintings. Well, young people look at that because we can make images with our phone.
Sure.
We just pull the phone out and take a picture. Well, suddenly they realize, well, wait a second. These are frescoes. These are painted on wet plaster. I mean, how did they do that? You know, they had to paint fast. They had to know what they were going to do. How on earth did they do that? And then you go to see the David, you know, in Florence. And you see this 18-foot tall chunk of marble that had been rejected by multiple other sculptors. It was out on a garbage heap. And Michelangelo comes along, and he finds it, and he begins to see the grains of the marble, and he sees the David. It's there, and he just has he just has to pull away the marble that's in the way, and there's the David. And you learn the stories behind the Mona Lisa, and then the subsequent stories of it getting stolen and all that.
Sure.
And this is just fascinating material. You go to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. You go to the Louvre in Paris, and there's just so much to experience. And again, one of the great things for young people and for moms and dads as well is that it suddenly gives us a perspective, a vantage point we didn't have before on ourselves. It gives us a perspective and a vantage point on the other people we're traveling with. You know, one of the things I love about our tours is how we see this group of people. We have people from New Zealand, South Africa, you know, Australia, from the UK, Canada, from various places around the country that go on our trips. Often there are readers that go and they want to go to the places they read about in books I've written. But the fascinating thing is they're from diverse places. They didn't know each other, lots of them, before the trip.
But you become friends on a trip like
Absolutely.
that. You make friends.
And I love hearing that they're staying together. Interaction, and that people are getting flights and they're going to see this family in Connecticut or they're going up to Toronto, and they didn't know them before the trip. I have people that went on trips who ended up marrying the brother of a girl they met on the trip, and they got to be friends, and that meant they visited. And
it opens your world.
It does.
It opens your world.
Really
and when you think of traveling, you know, you think of all the drudgery of it, the cost of it, and all that. Yeah. But the benefit, you've got to focus on that. Yeah. That you cannot provide your kids a better education than taking them somewhere. I asked you a question sometime back here about how do you get kids to do this? How do you get kids to start reading about history or learning about history? Or, you know, I think it's bits and pieces. I think you start out with a very short trip, maybe a long weekend or something. And then you add a day, and then you add another day. And over 2 or 3 trips, you kind of build time so the kids get introduced into it gradually. You don't overwhelm them with a 3-day or a 3-week trip to start with.
No, it's probably not a good idea. Exactly. But they're not ready for it.
No.
And for for our trips, I have a reading list that I suggest. Nobody's required to read on it, but for many years I did tours as a teacher in a classical Christian high school, and we did require. They had some pre-tests and all of that because they got so much more out of it. It was part of our curriculum for many years. But you know, folks who join us, I suggest the reading, and because you will always get more out of it when you've had the vicarious experience of reading.
I tell parents that when their kids are studying the missions of California up and down the coast, go to a couple of missions.
They're right there.
When you're studying the states, which was usually grade 5, when you're studying the states of the United States, go to a couple states and just kind of feel the dirt, feel the atmosphere, and see what that state looks like. And you build on that, and eventually you're into some very major trips. But you're introducing kids into history, but you're introducing them into a new world beyond themselves.
That's right. Absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, just last Saturday, I took my daughter on the ferry. We live on the peninsula in Washington State, across Puget Sound from Seattle, and my wife dropped my daughter Jillian, she's 13, off at the ferry in Bremerton, and we took the boat across, and we hiked up the hill and went to a Shakespeare play, All's Well That Ends Well. Magnificent production. And then we got on the bikes, the Lime bikes, and we rode down to the ferry and all that. That was a little outing that she will remember, I think, probably all her life. And we thoroughly enjoyed it, and we laughed and had a good time. And the play was marvelous, and we're still discussing it. And these kinds of things, and that's another component of travel, the drama and all of that. I mean, we go to the theater district in London. We see Les Mis. I've seen Les Mis in London 11 or 12 times, and it is a magisterial drama. We go to Shakespeare plays. On my Oxford Creative Writing Masterclass, we will be going to As You Like It in April. I have still a couple spots open for that April one and some in June. And we always go to a Shakespeare play, and we plan ahead, and we think, okay, how are we going to process this? How are we going to take this in? What is this?
Yeah.
What's this human thing called a play? What was Shakespeare doing? Why is Shakespeare so much a definer, a neologizer, a definer of our language even? You know, we need to know that. We need to get inside on that.
Yeah.
And travel's
I've
one of the great
taken
ways
2
to do it.
trips with you. You've been the tour guide. Got trips coming up, have you?
We do indeed.
What's next?
We kind of rotate through a variety of trips that we've been doing for some years now. The one that we're doing in June is an England and Scotland tour. We start in London, we end in Glasgow, and we go close on lots of things from church history and of course the history of the British Isles along the way, of course, and. We'll see a number of wonderful places right in London. We will then travel by coach to Chartwell. We'll go to where Churchill lived, and we'll talk about World War II there. We'll go to Canterbury Cathedral. We'll be staying in a hotel just a few blocks away from Canterbury Cathedral. So much history there to absorb and take in. We'll go to an evensong service at Canterbury Cathedral. We'll make our way up to Cambridge. We'll go to Cambridge and all those marvelous sites there in Cambridge, the colleges and so forth.
Do you have openings?
We have
Did somebody
some.
still
We
sign
have some
up to,
openings. Yes, we do have some openings. We are mid to upper 30s right now on that trip. So
it's getting tight.
It's going to get tight, but we do have probably about 12 spots open. We'd love to have people join.
If somebody
us.
couldn't do it because it's too soon.
Yeah.
What about the next one?
Yeah, the
next
next
year.
the next year
do?
we're going to do Rome to Geneva again.
When?
Marvelous trip. It'll be in June. We usually do June sort of after school's out, so later June, early July.
Good thing for family time then.
It is a very good thing
Yeah.
for family time. By design, we really want families to be able to come. And Rome is so multi-layered with history. You've got ancient Roman history. You've got the early church and persecution, the Colosseum. You've got the Mamertine prison where the Apostle Paul probably wrote 2 Timothy, and you have just so many marvelous layers of history. And then of course you have some of the best ice cream on the planet and some of the best food on the planet
Yes.
too. In Italy and on up to Florence, and taking in all the art and the beauty in Florence and that history, absorbing that. We stay in convents on that at least twice, and that's a great experience in itself, because both of the convents we stay in are working convents, and that's a helpful thing. We talk about Martin Luther's pilgrimage to Rome. We talk about Rome and current events going on in Italy today. We try to bring it up to the present as well, and onward up the Italian peninsula, up to Milan.
And these are family-friendly trips.
Very much so. Very
you
family-friendly.
incorporate kids and of various ages. And
we had a 14-year-old. I remember him saying that he wanted to go. His mom wanted to go. His older brother wanted to go. And his mom said, yeah, it's going to be a great trip. You're going to go to all these battlefields and all on the trip, the armistice tour. And he was all excited about that. Then his mom said, and you're going to have to earn the money for a good chunk of it. And he was just like, oh no, I'm going to have to. And the final day, you were there, the final day at dinner, he stood up, this 14-year-old kid, and he said, it was worth every penny of it and more.
he raised more, He raised it.
And he raised that money, and he felt like it was worthwhile. And I want that to be the case. I'm not interested. I want people to actually have a life-changing experience. Yeah. And a young person who gets their teeth into history and appreciation of history, sees the places I was there and knows what that means and wants to go back and read more about that.
Do you think that people, when they travel like that to these kind of places, really change? That their life does change, their thinking does change, their emotional state really goes through a change?
I think it certainly can. It certainly did for me. And I think, again, part of that was that it had the effect of helping me to see myself more realistically in the world. This was when you stand in front of the David, and you see that in Florence, you see that marvelous statue, and you think, how did he do that? Mm-hmm. How did he do that? He didn't have pneumatic tools, he didn't have any computer-generated imagery before he started in on this. How did they do those cathedrals? They didn't have any hydraulics. They didn't have any big lifts and
Primitive
all that kind of
tools.
stuff. Oh,
I
that's
tell you,
something.
that's-
Yeah. How did they do it? Or you go to Stonehenge in England, and see Stonehenge, and you think the historians don't agree how they could possibly have done this. And this stone comes from many, many, many miles away, and then they're not just standing them upright; they're actually putting them up on top. And these are things that weigh more than your house.
You stand there and wonder, in the world, how in the world can something like that get up?
Exactly. And it does have the effect of humility. It ought to have the effect of humility. Sometimes we come back and we brag about the places we went to.
Well, sure.
But in the big picture, it humbles us, and that's really where we ought to be. It makes us feel smaller. And the fact is, what does Isaiah say? It says that we're like a drop. The nations are like a drop in a bucket.
There you are.
It does help us to feel.
To put it in perspective.
Exactly.
Well, we've had a great conversation.
We have.
You are a man of great knowledge and experience.
I enjoy it.
And keep going, because you share it with others.
Yeah.
And you bring others along in the journey. There's a quote that I want to just end with you on, and this kind of tells what we've been talking about a little bit today. And here's the quote. As my Father planted for me, so do I plant for my children. And I think that's really what we've been talking about. Yeah. As I experience, I teach. Yeah. I allow my children to experience it as well. They benefit from what I have benefited from. And it's a passing on from generation to generation. And that's what you're into. You do that. You do it through your writing. You do it through your travels as a tour guide. You take something from one generation and you pass it to the next. And you've been looking at generations of 10, 15, 20 generations in history that you say, from here, we can learn this.
Yeah.
Great opportunity. Hey, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Dentist who has a passion for superior aesthetics and comfort, you need Dr. Christopher Wong with Cedar North Dental. Call 559-432-4948 or visit cedarnorthdental.com.
Hey! Try to close the club.
Tanya, come here.
At Boys and Girls Clubs, it's not just about trying new things.
Kitchen, my hometown.
It's not about learning the right steps.
4
or making contact.
5, 6, 7, 8.
It's not about exploring the future. It's about helping them build it. It's about taking steps to greatness. About making a connection. It's about proving every kid and teen has what it takes. It's about people in our clubs who bring out the greatness in every kid who enters our doors. It's not just about being on stage. It's about walking across it. Great futures start here, and here, and here.
Sat7 is a Christian media network that uses uncensored satellite television to broadcast across the Middle East and North Africa, and is also available globally online.
CentralValleyTalk.com.